Hey everybody, welcome to today's video. We're going to be doing a Resident Evil tier list, ranking the games from worst to best. I already kind of organized this a little bit for the setup so I can get the games somewhat in order, though it's still not the exact order. But without further ado, let's start getting right into it. And with that, we're going to start with Resident Evil 0. Resident Evil 0 isn't like the worst game in the series, but it does have a lot of issues. One of the main ones being that there is a lack of item boxes, as in there are none in the game at all. You have to drop your items if you want to get them out of your inventory, which does mean you can pick stuff back up later, but it also means if you have a key item that you're going to need again later, you're going to have to run all the way back to grab it, and then pick it up and make sure you have the space for it, and if you don't, you're going to have to drop other items, which you're going to have to come back for again later, and it just becomes really tedious. And it makes the game very backtrack-centric. Well, I don't think that ruins the game. I do think it is very annoying, and it was an experiment in the franchise, it was an experiment in how the franchise does its gameplay formula, because at the time, fixed camera angles was getting kind of played out for the series, because this is before RE4 remake. At this point, we've already had RE1, RE2, RE3, Code Veronica, so people are kind of used to the same formula again and again. And this tried to change it up, make it a bit new, unique, but it falls flat on its face more often than it hits. Though it does have some really good moments in it, so I'm personally going to have to put it at B tier. Because it's still a good game, but it's just not perfect. RE1, I'm going to consider this as RE1 and a director's cut. It's really good, I still love it, but the remake is way better. It improves on it in every way. And if you're truly wanting to play RE1, there's also the DS version, which is way better. So I'm going to have to put it in a C. And speaking of the DS port, Resident Evil Deadly Silence is next. And for that, I'm going to have to put it in A tier. I don't really think I have to explain too much on that. It's the original Resident Evil ported to the DS with a bunch of new features, new content, a multiplayer mode. You can play the classic RE1, or you can play the, essentially, I think it was called Rebirth RE1, and that had different layouts, different mechanics, new stuff added, and I think that's really cool. It was a really interesting port, and if I could ever get my hands on it again physically, I would love to. It's great. Absolutely recommend. And now we have Resident Evil 2, the original from 1998, I believe. And that's going to be an easy S tier. That game is still great, holds up perfectly. Raccoon City is so much fun to explore for the short bits of it you've got. And then the actual RPD, police station, is an absolute wonder to look around through. The lighting is great. And even if you've already played the remake, play the original. The original is so cool. It may be nostalgia talking for me, but I think the original is amazing and definitely needs to be played. And now we've got another easy S tier, Resident Evil 3. So if you've played RE3 Remake, I'm sorry for your loss. RE3, the original for PS1 though, is amazing, and it deserved a way better remake than what it got. And honestly, I'd say this one holds up better than the remake does. The original RE3 is so much fun to play, and definitely worth it. Now we've got an easy D tier, Resident Evil Gaiden for the Game Boy Color. There are some people who like this game. I don't know why. It sucks. I've played it a few times on emulators, and it is the worst piece of garbage I've ever seen. It sucks. I have nothing more to say than that. It just sucks. And these next few are going to be some easy placements as well. Resident Evil Resistance, D tier. It's online server. It's they were trying to do Outbreak without doing Outbreak, and it was kind of mid, and people tried to give it life for a while, but it just wasn't working. It was not a great game. It died quickly. And along with that is the one that launched with RE Village. Well, not launched with it, but it did come out later if you got Village for free. And it's just another attempt at online with Resident Evil, but this time it's like a versus shooter mode where you can turn into bioweapons. It's not great. I've gotten all the achievements on it. I tried to give it a chance. It's just not great. It's not worth it. It really isn't. And then we've got another one. This one, some people have probably never even heard of because it doesn't even have Resident Evil in its name. Umbrella Corps. So this is like a tactical shooter in the vein of CSGO within the Resident Evil universe. Nobody played it. Nobody bought it. Game died on launch. This thing is basically just got puffed out there and died instantly. It's not really even that noteworthy. I The only thing you can really say about it is that it exists. It's one of the games of all time. And this one's going to be a bit of a controversial placement, but I'm personally giving Resident Evil Survivor a B tier. I think Resident Evil Survivor is really fun. Yeah, it's kind of wonky, it hasn't aged the best, but for a PS2 spin-off, or PS1 spin-off title, where you're on a completely different gameplay method being a first-person shooter, it works okay. I like it. I like the multiple choices, very reminiscent of RE3 with its choices. Then it also allows you to see like different locations throughout the game. I think that's really cool. The story is cheesy, but all the PS1 games are kind of cheesy. I'm fine with that. I think it was entertaining, and it gets a bit more of a bad rap than it really deserves. This one is also going to be somewhat controversial. Code Veronica is a really love it or hate it game in the series. Like, some people absolutely love it, others absolutely hate it. Personally, I love it, but I can visibly see a lot of the flaws within it. So I'm acknowledging I'm pretty biased with this part, but I'm giving it an A rank. I love Code Veronica. It's really fun, though the backtracking throughout the game gets extremely tedious, especially when you're basically doing a lot of the same sections again as Chris. Although they do try and change it up a little bit, it does get really tedious and annoying, but at the same time, there's always so many hype moments going on throughout the game that I can kind of deal with it, because there's just not anything that really makes it like the worst thing ever for me, besides maybe like the moth hallway, but even that's more tolerable than a lot of stuff in Resident Evil 0. And it also has my favorite boss fight in the entire series, Nosferatu, which is just so cool looking. And then this one isn't going to be very controversial. Resident Evil Outbreak File 1 and 2 are an easy A tier. I'm going to treat File 2 as basically like an expansion for File 1, because that's kind of what it was. But I think it's cool. The concept of it's really neat. It sucks that there's no online for it anymore unless you emulate it, but if you have it on the PS2, you can also just play it on easy mode to try and grind everything out with the bots. The reason people say to play it on easy mode is because the AI sucks, like even worse than the original Dead Rising 1's AI. So you do have to get used to that. But overall, it's still a really fun game. It's got a lot of really interesting levels and settings with unique items. It's really cool, and I wish online support, like they'd give like a remaster or something for this thing so people can play it more officially nowadays with online. Maybe even add like some new features like voice chat and stuff natively into the game. That would be so cool. But Capcom has kind of just left it to rot, even though there's a lot of fans who genuinely love the Outbreak games, and I'm one of them. And then Resident Evil Dead Aim. This is 100% biased, but I'm also giving it an A tier. I love Dead Aim. I think the atmosphere is great. It's got some of the best music in the series. The tyrant design is really cool. And the story is cheesy and goofy, and it does a lot of stuff that would make it non-canon, like Morpheus being the one to cause the outbreak in the Arklay Mountains, which just doesn't make sense since we know it was the dude from RE0. But I'm fine with, like, for what it is, I think it's awesome. I really love the atmosphere. Running across the boat is so much fun. The second half of the game kind of slows down, but then once you get into the boss fight with Morpheus, it picks back up again, and I think it's cool. I would definitely recommend it. Dead Aim. It's fun. This one is going to be controversial to some people now that the remake's out. A lot of people think that the remake replaced the original. Personally, I still think the original RE4 and the remake both hold up amazingly well. And I'm going to give it an easy S tier. It's so much fun. And Salazar is perfect in this game. One of the few gripes I have with the remake is that Salazar isn't like the same little tiny Napoleon version that he is in this. And I think it's really entertaining. It's so much fun. The action's great. The story's goofy, but it just makes so much sense for what the series has been so far, and I really enjoy it. And there's still cool, deep, atmospheric moments like the Regenerador section, or Dr. Salvador when he chases you. It's fun. RE4 is fun. It's great. You should play it. This one's also going to be somewhat controversial, but those recently I've noticed a lot of people have been going easier on 5, so maybe this won't be as controversial as I think it's going to be. But I think Resident Evil 5 is great. I think it is the perfect conclusion to, like, what are we going to do after RE4? Oh yeah, just bring Chris back. We're used to swapping around protagonists in the series, and we haven't seen Chris in a minute. The last time was in Code Veronica, but before that we had Jill with RE3. So, why not do Chris now, and then we'll do this whole storyline of his previous partner being dead. And then we'll give him a new partner, Sheva. And then they kind of repeated that plot for 6 afterwards, which, going into that, 6 is going to be an easy D. I don't really like 6. The Leon campaign, if it was just the Leon campaign in Mercenaries mode, I think 6 would be a lot cooler. But all the other stuff like Chris's campaign, which is just reusing the plotline from 5, but also making Chris a drunk, and then it's not great. And then it's just mostly like a Gears of War ripoff for a campaign. And then there's Jake and Sherry, which is kind of cool conceptually, but in practice it's just kind of tedious and annoying because it's just a bunch of Kung Fu Bruce Lee moments followed by getting chased by a giant Nemesis ripoff. It's not entertaining. And then there was an Ada campaign, which was just so brief that, like, if you genuinely played it, you could forget it exists. Because it's just such a small section. I think it only takes like 2 hours compared to the rest of the campaigns. But even then, all of those campaigns together are so much bloat that it just makes the game drag on forever. And his gameplay is already too... Like, Resident Evil 4 and 5 had action, but it was mostly still like a shooter at its core. RE6 just felt like set piece after set piece after set piece after set piece, never stopping, and it just got tedious really quickly. This one's going to be an interesting ranking. Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City. That was basically like Resident Evil's version of Left 4 Dead, sorta. And it also had its own online shooter mode. And honestly, it's not that bad. There are some stuff in it that makes it non-canon, like Dead Aim and some of the others. Basically, you can find Leon and Claire, and you get a choice on whether to spare them or get rid of them. And it's a really interesting story. I wouldn't say it's like the best in the series, but it's fun to go through. And you also get to see Hunk, and it's cool because we don't really get a lot of Hunk within the mainline games. Usually when we do, it's modes like the Fourth Survivor or Mercenaries. We don't really get a lot of like actual campaign time with him. So giving him an operation in Raccoon City, even if it's just a few brief moments, is really cool. And this one's... I don't really know what most people think about Mercenaries 3D. But I love it. It's a 3DS game, and it's basically the Mercenaries mode from RE5 with some added content and shoved onto the 3DS, and I think it's really cool. There's not really much more to say about it. It's just the Mercenaries mode with a bunch of extra content shoved in, but I love it, and I'd say it's an easy... I wouldn't say B. I'd say it's better than a B. I'd say it's an A. And this one's going to be interesting. Resident Evil Umbrella Chronicles, one of the light gun games. I think it's really fun, but being on the PS3 and the Wii only gives you a really limited user base, unless you're somebody who's emulating the game. And I think it's cool, but it's mostly just a bunch of assets reused, and it's very much just a concept of what a game like this could be. So I definitely have to say it's a B. Because it does what it does well, but it definitely gets overshadowed by a sequel, which is the Dark Side Chronicles. The Dark Side Chronicles is amazing. I don't think it reuses any assets, to be honest. I haven't seen any. But it has a remake of RE2, Code Veronica. There's its own campaign with the Javier Project, which is like this whole prequel thing to RE4, which has Krauser as your... it's like your prequel story with Krauser. It's so cool. Honestly, I'd say Dark Side Chronicles is way better than an A rank. It's an S rank. Easily. Dark Side Chronicles is awesome. And then Resident Evil Revelations, that's an A rank. I think Resident Evil Revelations was great. It was coming out at a time where the series was becoming very action-focused, and although it wasn't really that scary, it definitely tried to bring the horror back into the series. It really breathed in like a new life for the franchise, and I think that's why it got a sequel so quickly with Revelations 2. And Revelations 2, I think, is a really great sequel. I like how they added co-op. A lot of people don't really like co-op in the series, but I think it's fun. I think they did it well, where your co-op partner isn't able to like be as much of an action badass as you can with your weapons, because they're usually either melee only or they're there to like spot enemies and be more of like a support role within the scenario, which makes for an interesting dynamic. And I think it's really cool. Another A rank, pretty easy. And then Resident Evil 7, which was the first mainline game after 6 to come out, like in the numbered entries, and it was really good. I love it. It really had a great horror atmosphere. Every part of it was just so much fun to run through. Mia's great. A lot of the... well, she's great to hate when she's like possessed by Evelyn, as well as the other Bakers. And it's just really fun to go through. I think Village retroactively makes it a little bit worse, but I still think Resident Evil 7 stands on its own as one of the best in the series. I think its enemy design could be a bit better. The molded are a bit generic. And, well, not generic, but like the enemy types of the molded, yeah, you can distinguish them, but they're not very visually interesting. It feels like they could have done more with that. Though the Bakers are really cool to fight throughout the game, so I will give them a bit of a pass there because the boss fights are fantastic. I think RE7 is easy S tier because it really brought the franchise back. And now we're into the remakes category. For RE1 remake, that's an easy S tier. Everybody loves RE1 remake, and it's easy to see why. It's RE1 but so much better. And it's just really fun to play through. The music is great, the atmosphere is great, the graphics are incredible, even today. And it's just so much fun. I definitely recommend it. And this is going to be the same thing with RE2 Remake. It does have a few stumbles here and there, like the zapping system not really being as good as it was on the original game. With things like, regardless of if you're playing the A and B scenario, you'll still see like Annette Birkin die twice and a bunch of other weird things throughout the game. But I still think that it's good. It's a really good remake of 2. And I think both of them work to like make the other one better. It's really fun, and I definitely recommend it. RE3 Remake, D tier. I hate RE3 Remake. It is so bad. You can literally beat it on your first playthrough in like an hour and a half, even if you're trying to go slow. It's insane how like little content there is in that game. And a lot of people like to say, well, it came out so quickly after RE2 Remake. It was in development alongside RE2 Remake. Probably not during the whole duration of RE2 Remake's development, but it was in development alongside it for at least a small, like some portion of time. And during that, they were also using RE2 Remake assets for RE3 Remake, so they've got a lot of assets already pre-made for them. So I don't really see the excuse for it being as bad as it was. I think it was, it was Capcom's B team, so it's not going to be as good as the A team making RE2 Remake. But if they can't handle it, don't give them the project in the first place, because this just turned out like garbage. Honestly, I wouldn't even recommend RE3 Remake. I would recommend avoiding it at all cost. Resident Evil 6 is a better purchase with your money than RE3 Remake. And then Resident Evil 4 Remake, that's an S tier. Instantly S tier. It's a really, really good remake. So much so that some people think it replaced the original. As I've already said, I kind of disagree, but I do think it is an amazing remake. It does a lot of what RE4 did so much better. And going from an action focus to a horror focus works really well. I really think it improves a lot. Though there are some issues with it that I have, like Salazar not being his goofy little Napoleon self, but I get how they had to change that for RE4 Remake to work as it was going to be. They also made Ashley a lot better. She's a lot less annoying in the remake than she was in the original, and they made her more of an actual character, which is really cool. I think it definitely is better than RE4 original, but I don't think it replaces it. I think they both work together to like amplify what is what, because you can't really understand how good the remake is until you've played the original and seen how good that was, if that makes any sense. And then Resident Evil Village, I'll be honest, I don't really like Village that much. It was okay, but I think Mia getting off scot-free after the events of RE7 with her being a literal bioterrorist and facing no punishment is weird and makes no sense, though I can kind of excuse it because a lot of stuff in Resident Evil doesn't make a lot of sense. But along with that, I just don't really like it that much. The gameplay is okay, but it's not my favorite. The boss fights are really interesting. I love the boss fights in the remake. The enemy design is definitely improved from the molded. I like the enemy variety a lot more, but the plot of Village just isn't that entertaining to me. And spoilers for Village if you haven't played it, but the reveal that Ethan is just a mold and he's been mold since RE7 is just weird, and I don't really like it. It doesn't make it more interesting, it just makes it even more goofy, and it creates more questions than it really answers. Along with that, it also means that Mia knew about this the entire time and just didn't decide to tell anyone, which is even more reason why she shouldn't be free, because she's a literal bioterrorist hiding information that could lead to catastrophic shit. And then the DLC afterwards was okay. Rule of Rose, I liked it, but I don't think it was like the most amazing thing ever. So overall, I'd give it a B tier. It's fun. I definitely would like to play it again, but it's not one of the games that I'm like racing to grab like any of the others in A or S tier. And with that, we've basically ranked the entire series. I think that's almost all. Yeah, that is all of them. I don't know how this list is going to go down, but I don't know. I don't see this being too controversial. I see some of these getting a little bit of people heated, but like, I don't see there being like huge outrage for my picks. But yeah, I hope y'all enjoyed the video. If you agree or disagree, or if you liked it, please feel free to like and subscribe. I hope to see y'all again soon. Catch you later.